Welcome to Cold War Conversations.
This is the British Broadcasting Corporation.
Fünf, zwei, sieben, eins, sechs, sechs, neun, acht, drei.
Well, who's our first letter from today, Edward?
An old friend of yours, Doris, Brian Hartley of Thornton-le-Field, asking what's being done to build up Anglo-Soviet relations.
And I'm here to host this final program from the German Democratic Republic for you.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Cold War Conversations. I'm delighted to welcome award-winning author David Young, who has written the Stasi Child Karin Müller series of crime thrillers set in East Germany in the mid-1970s. Shortlist's review of Stasi Child reads, "Can't get enough of Cold War Germany after Deutschland 83. This is your latest reading companion." There will be links to all of the books in the show notes at coldwarconversations.com, and I'm delighted to say I've read and enjoyed them all. We welcome David Young. Hello, David.
Hello, Ian. Thanks very much for inviting me on.
Well, no, it's great to have you on. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I had a book event in East Grinstead yesterday evening, which I took my Wartburg police car along to, and unfortunately it broke down on the way. So that was a bit of a disaster. But...
Oh dear. Well, more about your Wartburg police car later. Keep the listeners intrigued, David. You know?
Yes.
No. So can you just tell us about yourself and how you became an author?
Yes, certainly. So I write a crime fiction series set in East Germany in the mid-1970s. It started with Stasi Child, and then the second book was Stasi Wolf, and then more recently, at the start of this year, the third book, A Darker State. I was a journalist for more than 25 years with the BBC, and then before that, working in local newspapers. But I'd had enough of the BBC, and the BBC has had enough of me. And I decided to try and find a second career. And to be honest, journalists don't have that many transferable skills, I suppose, unless you work in financial journalism and you know how to play the stock market. So I thought, as many journalists do, I'd try to write a novel. Now, I first did this about 15 years ago, I suppose, when I wrote a crime thriller set on the Isle of Wight, which I couldn't get a publisher, so I self-published it. But I thought this time I would do it more seriously, so I signed up for a crime fiction MA. At that time, it was the only crime fiction MA in the country. This was 2012 at City University in London. So I was doing that initially while I was working at the BBC. And then, I suppose about a year in, I realised that if I took redundancy from the BBC, I could sort of eke out my redundancy until my old age pension. And even if I didn't get a book deal, I'd probably be happier out of the BBC and trying to get a book deal. But luckily, I did get a book deal. So all went swimmingly.
Good, and that's what we're here to talk to you about. So now, the Stasi Child series, is it called the Stasi Child series, or is it the Karin Müller series?
I think officially it's the Karin Müller series, yes. Stasi Child was the first book. That did quite well, so I think some people do call it the Stasi Child series, but the publishers actually decided for this latest one, I think it's a bit of an experiment, to drop the word Stasi or Stasi from the title. But yes, Karin Müller series, and Karin Müller is the main character. She's the head of a murder squad. So she works for the Volkspolizei, the People's Police in East Germany in the mid-1970s, and she's the only female head and also the youngest head of a murder squad.
Right. Okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about the main characters as I would describe them in a moment. Why did you choose East Germany as a location for your crime novel, and why did you choose crime specifically? Well,
crime probably because you tend to write what you enjoy reading. I mean, I'm not a massive crime fiction addict, and I do read other books. But I suppose, I'd like Child 44 and books like that. And so I wanted to try something like that, but then give it a different spin. That was one idea. But the actual inspiration came, I would say it's about 10 years ago now. Again, as a result of being fed up with the day job, in the evenings I was letting off steam playing in a little indie pop band, and we managed to blagger our way onto a tour, a 1-week tour of Germany, and most of the places that booked us were in the east of Germany, and it really made a big impression on me, how much of East Germany you could still see. And so then when I was on the crime fiction MA, a few years later, we were sort of experimenting with different starts of different novels. And Stasi Child actually started out as an experimenter, just an opening chapter to illustrate setting. And the idea came from that little tour by my band. And when was this? How long since? That's about, I think it's about 10 years now. So 2008. Right. It was actually, I wrote a tribute song to Edwin Collins, and he rather liked it and gave me a quote about my song, and that helped us secure the tour. So these places in East Germany didn't really know what they were booking? They didn't know what they were booking at all. No, it was a conversation I'd had at a party with somebody who was in a ska band, not a very well-known ska band, and he said, "Oh, places in Germany just love booking British bands. They just love saying you're over from London. You ought to give it a go." So I did give it a go, and we managed to get what was then quite a trendy club, the Bang Bang Club in Mitte, which was underneath Hackescher station, which in East German times was Marx Engelsplatz S-Bahn station. Yeah. And they gave us a support slot to quite an up-and-coming band. And then having secured that gig, I think other places thought, oh, there must be something important, which we weren't, and we managed to get other gigs. So, we did it all on... Sorry, we did it all on the basis of one full day of rehearsals. So you can imagine how disastrous it was at times. And are there any videos on YouTube of any of your gigs? There are, yes, but I don't think I'm going to advertise them because they're terrible. Oh, you've got a solid now, David. Not the gigs. Okay, so the band is called the Candy Twins. That was the first band. That was the band that went on tour. But then it did transform into another band called Tender Objects. And Tender Objects did actually get a download single played by Steve Lamacq on Six Music. So you can find that one. It's called April Showers by Tender Objects. And that was played, I think, probably in about 2011 on the BBC. Wow. So you've got an alternative career there anyway, even without writing books. No, the royalties from the music, I think, have earned me a total of $33 or something, which I've got as a check, which I've never cashed. That's it. Well, anyway, back to the Karin Müller series. I'm really interested to know why you chose a female lead. I think it's brilliant because it really works well in terms of her interaction, with her colleagues. It keeps it really, really interesting. But why did you go for a female lead? Well, it was I suppose, and I have admitted this before, it was a slightly cynical decision because I thought, books like this set in Cold War times, I mean, it's not really a Cold War novel, it's a sort of Cold War era novel, I like to say. But I think they tend to appeal more to a male audience. I'm sure some people would disagree, but I think they do. And yet the main readership for crime novels generally is a female audience. So I thought, well, why not try and, draw in a female audience as well by having a main female character? And it does also reflect East German life, because women had a much greater role in the workplace in East Germany and indeed in the communist world, full stop, than in the West at that time.
Yeah.
So more than 90% of women in East Germany, I think that's approximately the figure, were in work.
Right.
So I think there was more equality, but at the same time, I think women often ended up doing the housework and doing a job, so both.
Yeah.
Her husband is a little bit of a dissident, a bit of a rebel.
Yeah.
And yes, something happens to him, but it's not absolutely clear what has happened, because yes, he apparently sends a letter from the West, but is it from him? Or is it the Stasi who have faked it? So there we are.
Yeah,
it's what I get emailed about most.
Right. There's
a particular chapter in Stasi Child that people say, we don't quite understand what's happened there, and I when I reply, I tell them that that is by design. It's meant to be left slightly ambiguous.
Right.
And it does get explained more in book 3, but probably not totally explained.
No. Cliffhanger stuff.
Yeah, maybe.
Now, the three main characters that I see in the books are obviously Karin, and there's Werner, who is her deputy.
Yep, Werner Tilsner, her deputy, exactly, yeah.
And Klaus Jaeger, who is this sort of he's a Stasi Oberleutnant, tenant. Oberstleutnant.
Yes, he starts off as an Oberstleutnant in Stasi Child, but by the later books, he's promoted to Oberst, which is colonel, yes. But he starts off as a lieutenant colonel in the Stasi, and he is, in effect, Müller's handler. And I think it becomes clear that he's chosen her because she is young and inexperienced, and he thinks she can be moulded, or the Stasi hierarchy, or whichever part of it he works for, think she can be moulded to do what they want. But yes, those are the three main characters, and I suppose a lot of the book is about the interplay between them. Yes.
Yeah. And how did you find out how the East German police operated? How did you...
Being a journalist, you are used to doing research. And I'm forever on the internet researching, in inverted commas. Often that involves researching Hull City message boards, because I'm a big Hull City fan, although my fandom has been sorely tested by our current set of owners, so I don't go as much as I used to. But journalists are used to research, and so my main areas of research, I guess, one of the problems was when I started, I didn't speak German or nothing more than a very little bit of tourist German to order a beer or a hotel room. So what I was doing was buying memoirs written in German, for instance, by inmates of Jugendwerkhofer, which were the severe reform schools. And then what I would do is tear out the pages, which people get very upset about, actually, when I tell them. Tear out the pages, feed them through my scanner, and turn them via optical character recognition into Microsoft Word documents in German. And then when I had the documents in German, I could then put selected bits of these through Google Translate, and what came out at the end is gobbledygook in many ways. You know, it destroys the narrative, but you can find out enough of the information to get the facts. So that was one area of research. And then I did actually, in the early days, I got in touch with the Berlin police presidency, and they very kindly invited a former East German policewoman in, who now works for the police in the United Germany, to talk to me, and also an expert on crime in East Berlin. And then I also tracked down a couple of, if you like, murder squad heads. So one of them was the head of the murder squad which cracked one of East Germany's most famous cases, the crossword puzzle murder, and I draw on some of that for my second book, Stasi Wolf. And the other one was the head of a serious crime squad that was set up in the early 1980s, and to some extent Müller's promotion in the beginning of A Darker State to head up a special crime squad reflects some of that. So yeah, they were very helpful, and yes, still are.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm intrigued as to how you make it sound very easy to just sort of like get the Berlin police force to find these people for
well, you see, well, they it's true. Most organisations, especially police organisations, I think it's true probably if you were writing a crime novel in Britain, that the police will have a press officer, public relations officer, and they want the police to be seen in a good light generally, so they will tend to cooperate. So yeah, no, they were very friendly. It was the PR officer, and he was offering to show me round old people's police cells that were, considered pretty much on a par with the Stasi prisons. I didn't take him up on it, as I've seen plenty of Stasi prisons off my own bat. But he set up all these interviews, which was nice. And as you know, I spent an afternoon in the Berlin police presidency talking to these people with an interpreter.
Yeah.
But the actual detectives, true crime is quite popular in Germany, and so both of these detectives had written true crime books in German, and so I tracked them down either through their publishers or their websites, or I think one of them was doing a talk at a library in Rostock, so I got in touch with Rostock Library, and they managed to put me in touch with him.
Oh, okay.
So.
Okay, and the real life crime that is sort of like the centerpiece of Stasi Wolf, I found fascinating when I read the book. In fact, when I read the book, I hadn't realised it was a real crime.
It's only now. I've taken part of it, so that's. I think some people. I saw one review where somebody thought it was all based on the crossword puzzle murder, which it isn't. I mean, the crossword puzzle murder was very specifically a boy of I think age 7 or 8 went missing on the way to the cinema in the early 1980s, and his body was found dumped by a railway line about a week later in a suitcase. And the reason it got its name, the crossword puzzle murder, was that the best bit of evidence was this partially completed crossword that in a newspaper that was dumped along with the body, and the handwriting was fairly unusual and typical of an older woman. That's what the handwriting experts thought, and so in real life they set up what was and still is the biggest ever handwriting sampling exercise in the world, and they collected, with the help of the Stasi, which is what was interesting, they collected more than 500,000 samples of handwriting and did eventually crack the case. So I've taken those elements and used them as part of my own crime. So yeah. So
no,
which I try and explain in the author's notes, but I think some people will basically all my novels, I draw on real stories, but they're not fictionalizations of real stories. So it's not like Hilary Mantel, has fictionalized the story of, Henry VIII, whatever she did. Anyhow, yes, but it's not like that.
Right. I should obviously pay more attention to the author's notes.
Well, no. And those are the bits I enjoy writing most, actually, the author notes.
Yeah.
I like doing that.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. So when you were talking to these people who used to work for the Volkspolizei side, did you get any insight into how influential the Stasi were on some of these cases?
Yes,
and how that worked?
I did. I mean, there is some artifice in my novels, and I have, I suppose, some East Germans, many East Germans, particularly those who fell foul of the regime, would say that the People's Police were just as bad as the Stasi, they're one and the same thing, organs of the state. So I have created a little bit of artifice where I guess, at times the People's Police are considered better than the Stasi, you might say. And I suppose some of that is based on the interviews with the detectives, these ex-detectives, because they all insist that basically their job was doing police work, just as it would be in the UK, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. If you dig a bit further, then yes, there was liaison with the Stasi, not necessarily on cases. So again, there's a bit of artifice there in what I've done. But say that the guy who was the head of the serious crime squad, I think it was sort of serious crimes where the culprit was unknown or they didn't have a suspect. He admitted to me that there was liaison at a high level with the Stasi and that a lot of his staff didn't know that. So people under him didn't know that. So he was an Oberstleutnant, a lieutenant colonel. Mm-hmm. But also in virtually every police station, there would have been at least one unofficial Stasi informer. And there may well have been an official one as well. So, yes. And then, I found out tales about, they would say that the Stasi didn't always know everything. One policeman told me of a colleague who'd managed to conduct an affair with a female Stasi officer without the Stasi knowing for several weeks. So the Stasi didn't always know everything.
No, which became apparent in 1989.
Yes, but
now, and your stories are set in 1970, so I guess that gives you a lot of scope to sort of like move them forward.
Yes, I mean what I wanted to do was start at a period when I suppose East Germany was, if not at its most powerful, but the rot hadn't fully set in, if you like. And I think in the early to mid 70s, East Germany had started getting recognised internationally, blah blah blah. And also, I mean, the main thing for me was that I wanted to have enough room to continue the series. If enough people bought the books, and so that's what it depends on, really. The future of any crime series depends on the public enjoying and buying the novels. And if they do in large enough numbers, I'd carry on and on. But usually, most crime series, the majority of crime series, tend to be 3 books maximum. So I think I've been lucky that I'm contracted for 5. So there's another 2 after this. And then we'll just have to see where it goes after that.
Well, I'm very looking forward to the other 2. I've read the first 3, and
fantastic.
They're great. They're great, and this sort of brings me on to you appear to capture very well the atmosphere of the GDR and what life was like there. How did you get that sense and, able to fill in that level of detail?
Well, I think it's through research. So it's through looking at things on YouTube, reading books, or in my case, in inverted commas, reading books, touring around, doing research trips and just trying to imagine what it was like. Now, the reaction in Germany has been, I suppose you could say it's been mixed in that, I've seen some German readers of the English books, 1-star it or whatever. But equally, I got an unsolicited email from a German who now lives in South Africa, but had a lot. I don't think he was East German, but he had a lot. He conducted a lot of business in East Germany at the time, and he said he couldn't believe how well an English person who hadn't actually visited there had captured it. So that I was very pleased to get that email, because the series hasn't sold in Germany, which is always disappointing to me. We've sort of encircled territories around Germany in that it's sold to 11 territories internationally, or at least Stasi Child did. But the German publishers consistently say, why should we trust an English author writing about a difficult time in our history? Well, at least that email from this German sort of gave the other point of view, in that he did fully trust it. So that was very gladdening to get that.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you choose your locations? I mean, I guess with Stasi Wolf, because the crossword puzzle killer was set in Halle Neustadt, that's why you went for that
actually,
location.
It wasn't. No, it was the other way about. That I was doing checking research for Stasi Child, and so part of Stasi Child is set in the Harz Mountains and on the Brocken, and also part of it is set in a Jugendwerkhof. And the Jugendwerkhof that I modelled my fictional Jugendwerkhof on, the Reform School, was modelled on this one at Torgau, which is northeast, I think, of Leipzig. It's on the Elbe, and it's where the American army met the Russians in 1945. And that was a closed Jugendwerkhof, closed in the sense it was like a prison, and it was considered particularly severe. Lots of sexual abuse, physical abuse. Anyway, I wanted to go and see that. So, and then the route from there to the Harz Mountains took me very near Halle. So I knew about Halle Neustadt being a new town, and I just decided to drive through it. And then as soon as I was driving through it, I thought, oh my God, what a fantastic setting for a novel, because in East German times, only 4 streets had names. I've taken that down even further to just 1. So only in my novel, only 1 street, the main street, the Magistral, has a name, and every other street was basically designated by numbers. So people's addresses were just numbers to represent their housing estates, their apartment, their block, and their apartment and floor. So I just thought it was a bizarre and fantastic setting. And then, having decided to do that, then obviously I was researching Halle Neustadt, and then I discovered about the crossword puzzle murder. So it was back to front, really. So I do these. I will go and research possible areas. So that's what I did for Stasi Child. I did that, and then Rügen was featured in Stasi Child because somebody at the BBC knew an East German who worked, or former East German, who now worked in the BBC World Service, Oliver Burlau. And Oliver very kindly reads each novel before they go to press and picks me up on errors, serious errors. He sometimes lets some things go through. But Oliver came from Selene. He lived in Selene on Rügen. And so, he told me some stories about his childhood, et cetera, et cetera. And so I decided to visit Selene. And then, I was impressed enough that I decided to, I suppose, steal some of Oliver's stories, but, he knew I was doing it. But I decided to set a chunk of the novel in Selene. And then the Harz Mountains in Stasi Child, again, that dates back to the indie pop band tour, the Candy Twins tour, because one of the places that booked us was a little pension in the Harz Mountains, actually just on the western side of the old state border, because the Harz were split virtually right down the middle by the inner German border between East Germany and the Federal Republic. And this little pension booked us, and we played in a blizzard to about a dozen people. So I've still got a picture of that, but that was where the inspiration from that came from. And then A Darker State, I suppose I got a bit of a fetish for East German new towns. So having seen Halle Neustadt, I wanted to see some of the others. So I visited Eisenhüttenstadt, which was the original East German new town, the first one, built in the 50s, originally called Stalinstadt, until he fell out of favour. And Eisenhüttenstadt means ironworks city, and it's just all about the steelworks, which
sounds very picturesque.
Work Street. Yeah, not really, but actually it is the prettiest of the new towns. I always say it looks a bit like Cheltenham, but maybe that's stretching a point. But that was, so I liked it and decided to set A Darker State, or parts of A Darker State, there. So that's sort of how I come up with the ideas for the settings. For book 4 is more the sort of first person. I always tend to have a first person story, the second narrative, if you like, intermingled in amongst Karin Müller's investigation, which is third person past. And the first person story in book 4 will be through the eyes of an inmate at the Mittelbau-Dora labour camp, which is where the camp workers from the camp, slave labourers from the camp, worked in the Mittelwerk underground factory where the Nazis built V1 and V2 rockets after the Allies bombed Peenemünde on the Baltic coast. So it's more tied, if you like, that first person story is virtually all true, if you like. It's a fictionalized truth. And then I am extrapolating into the 70s in East Germany, and there is a crime linked to this past truth from World War II. So the locations for that are sort of predetermined by, to some extent, by the story.
Yeah. And have you got 5 planned or ideas?
Yes, I've started some initial research for 5, because book 4 is at the rewrite stage. I hate doing rewrites, but I've got a rewrite to do by the end of this month, which I should have been doing today, but I was listening to the Cup semi-final instead. So book 5 is going to be set in the what was called the catastrophe winter in East Germany, which was the winter of 1978-79, when there was, and I'm going back to Rügen. And in a sense, it's going to be Stasi Child Part 2. It's actually going to continue Irma Berendt's story, but it's going to be during this winter. And I'm also using some elements. The thing about the winter of 78-79 was huge snowdrifts. Rügen was actually cut off from the rest of East Germany, with drifts meters high, and they were having to do airlifts of food, etc., etc. But I'm also going to use some elements from the winter of 62-63, and time shift some of those, because at that time the Baltic was virtually entirely frozen over. So you can imagine that gives a few possibilities for plots, which is what I'm going to use.
Okay, well, I'll leave the listeners intrigued to follow those through. Do you have any GDR or Cold War items that you've collected in the course of your research?
Well, the main thing is, which I mentioned earlier, is my car, which is it's allegedly a 1972 Wartburg. It definitely is a Wartburg. There's some doubt over what year it is, actually. It might be a later, slightly later model made to look like an earlier model. But Wartburgs were used by the People's Police and the police, both as squad cars, but particularly by the criminal police would use unmarked Wartburgs. And your listeners might be aware of the main East German crime series. I suppose it would have been the equivalent of Z cars or whatever. Polizeiruf 110, which that refers to it's the German version of dialing 999 is 110. And so even in that, you can see in some of the episodes the Oberleutnant in charge of the murder squad. He drives a white or off-white Wartburg estate, and I just happened to see on eBay one day this off-white Wartburg estate being sold by some guy up in Falkirk, and in a mad moment I decided to buy it. And so one day saw me early in the morning catching a flight from Luton Airport up to Edinburgh Airport. And this guy, Chris, came to meet me at Edinburgh Airport in this Wartburg car. So I thought, well, if he's meeting me in the car, it must be okay. So when we went back to his house, I did the deal for, I think, £1,600 or £1,700. And did all the paperwork or whatever you have to do. And then I set off. And I had to drive it back to where I live, near London, which was quite a mad thing to do in the same day, as it's more than 400 miles, I think. And as soon as I'd left his house, the car just felt as though it was going to stop dead, you know.
Oh.
And I turned onto the motorway and it's spluttering and spluttering. I thought it's just going to grind to a halt, and I've made a terrible mistake. But slowly and slowly it seemed to clear and get better. Just sort of started pumping the throttle gradually, and eventually I got it up to 70 miles an hour or so. And we sailed back to London, and I did it all in, I think, just over 8 hours with 2 or 3 breaks to refill the 2-stroke petrol mixture. So there we are. And then I decided to convert it into a police squad car. So my brother-in-law, who is a metal worker, he built me. They have these sort of gantries on which the blue lights and loudspeakers sat. So he made me the gantry, and then I located on eBay some original East German rotating blue lights, got an electrician to fit them, found the correct siren sound, and got an electrician to fit a small amp. And then what I do is I play the siren sound from my iPhone, so high tech, through the loudspeakers, so I can have the right siren sound and the flashing lights, which of course is totally illegal on UK roads. So I only ever do it off road. So there we are. That's my main bit of East German museum, my main museum piece. Wow.
And I've seen this in the flesh as well. I was lucky to see David at one of his book signings, and it's an impressive vehicle. He has to cover up the lights with carrier bags when he's.
Yes, I've got one Asda bag and one Co-op bag. So on them, there we are.
in the course of your research, what was the most surprising thing that you discovered, do you think?
Ooh. Well, I suppose that a thing that really resonated with me, I was for A Darker State, I was, part of it I decided to set in Bautzen 2, Bautzen 2, which, Bautzen is a lovely sort of medieval town in, is it in the upper Lausitz? I'm not sure, but it's about level with Dresden, if you like, and a bit further east in layman's terms.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very pretty town, but it was also with all these medieval or anyway historic monuments and towers, but it was also the site for the worst Stasi prison. Bautzen was regarded as the worst, the most severe Stasi prison. So I decided I ought to go and have a look round, which I did. And when I was having a look round, I saw this guy sort of, not just looking round, but actually lying down on the cell beds, almost trying them for size. And so in my pidgin German, I tried to ask him what he was doing. And it turned out that he had been a prisoner in 1970, I think it was, and this was his first visit since then. So quite, things like that, it's quite an emotional, it really brings it home, that the real stories behind it, I guess. Yeah. And I suppose in terms of other research, well, the story that I've extrapolated, the true story or the true scientific research that sparked the idea for A Darker State, which I've extrapolated into a fictional story, but based on that research, that really shocked me because, we know it's well known about the medical experiments on athletes and the fact that a lot of East German athletes, particularly female athletes, through the use of steroids, basically their sexuality was changed, wasn't it? But I found this research, which some East Germans said, well, we've never heard of that. I don't think that's true. But there was actually, it was based on a book written by an eminent endocrinology professor. And so that was probably the most surprising thing. It was all about experiments on rats to, if you like, completely change someone's personality and sexuality. And I better not give more away than that. But after researching it and writing the draft, what I realized to my horror was that the guy who wrote this scientific book was still alive. And I just assumed he was dead, and therefore there was no risk of libel, but he was still alive. So, so I had to take legal advice. And I mean, mine is very much a fictionalized story, extending that, a rogue scientist extends that research in a fictional way. But yes.
And that's why they always have that thing at the front of a book saying,
yes, all the disclaimers. Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Now, with the Karin Müller series, I mean, I think it would make great TV. And I mean, when you're writing these books, do you have people in mind, or do you have a visual image of the characters?
I don't, and I didn't. I absolutely don't really write it with TV or film in mind. But I suppose I'm not the biggest reader in the world, really. And we were talking about crime fiction. I'm not. I sometimes feel quite awkward at these crime fiction events because I won't have necessarily read all the authors that people are talking about. I mean, I do like crime fiction, but I do very much like watching crime thriller series on television, particularly some of the Scandi crime stuff, although my favourite is Engrenage, Spiral, the French crime series, which I think is fantastic. So maybe, I think probably just through osmosis, some of that then probably translates into the page, the written page. Now, the novels were under option to Euston Films, who did Minder and the Sweeney. So I was getting all very excited about that, because Euston Films were recently revived by Fremantle TV. But you know, the fact is that loads of novels are optioned, and probably 1 in 30 of novels that are optioned actually then get seen on either the big screen or the small screen. And the company their approach was to try and do it a bit like an English Wallander, so with English actors, which, to be honest, I was always slightly dubious about, and it hasn't come off. So I think it would make excellent television. I think Stasi Child itself, or any one of the three, would make a very good film. But I suspect it needs to be made in Germany. You know, for authenticity's sake, I think it needs to be made in Germany with German actors, and then to have subtitles. And so it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, in that probably I need to be published in Germany. If I could get a German production company or film company interested, then probably that would lead to being published in Germany. So, but at the moment, it's just not come together.
So if you had an infinite budget, who would you cast as Karin Müller?
Well, I always change my mind on this. I know that the TV company was thinking of somebody from Game of Thrones, but I don't watch Game of Thrones, so they threw out this name, and it didn't mean anything to me. There's an actress whose name escapes me, although it's double-barreled, and she was born in Beverley, who is in a lot of period drama. I think Anna Maxwell, something or other. I thought she would be quite good, but she's probably, Karin is younger than her, so maybe not. So I don't have a choice, really. No.
Okay.
I don't. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
I should have prepared better for that one.
I'm just intrigued, because obviously, whenever people read a book, they tend to have an image of the person, and
I think the thing is that if you do sell your novels, unless you are a real big hitter, an Ian Rankin or a Val McDermid or somebody even bigger, then you lose control. You don't have any control. They'll say you're a consultant producer or whatever, but it'll be it'll be whatever the TV company's vision is that gets on screen. So on that basis, I haven't tried to look too far ahead. If it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. So, but I've got a mortgage to pay off, so it would be very nice if it did happen.
No, absolutely. So, if you were making a film about the Cold War, not necessarily Stasi Child, is there a particular piece of music that you think sort of like would resonate with that? I guess you're.
Well, yes. I mean, music. I'm very into my music, and of course, I love my own music to get on there, because I could make even more money that way, couldn't I? But no, I was a big fan of the Welsh 1970s, late 60s, early 70s rock group Man. Don't know if you've ever heard of Man. You're probably too young, Ian.
I haven't.
But no, you haven't heard of Man. Well, Man, I think Man's highest chart position was probably about number 23 for one of their albums. But there's an album they had out called Slow Motion from about I think 1975. And Man were very big in Germany, although I think mainly in West Germany. But slow motion's got a very filmic, it almost sounds like a film soundtrack.
Right.
You know, I used to listen to it a load at school. It's got a very iconic cover, which I don't know if do you know the American magazine Mad?
Yes.
Which and all that artwork. Well, it was done by the same artist, and based on that, and it's that character from Mad putting his hand in a fish or something like that. Anyway, there we are. Slow Motion by Man.
Right. Well, I'll see if I can find a link to that.
But unfortunately, they wouldn't be able to ever play it live because the main people from Man have sadly recently died.
Are there any books in English that you'd particularly recommend for anyone interested in the GDR, apart from obviously the Karin Müller series?
Yeah, no, there are a lot of very good non-fiction books, but the one that absolutely blew me away recently was, and they sent me a review copy, even though it's worth, you have to pay £100. It's one of these fancy coffee table books.
Yeah.
There's a museum in Los Angeles called the Vendor. The Vendor was the change. So when the wall falls. So the Vendor Museum in Los Angeles has a huge collection of East German stuff. So weirdly, there is this East German museum in the United States, which I'd love to visit sometime. Anyway, they produced basically it's more like a briefcase, if you like, but it is a book of all their collection. So this fantastic thing in full colour, which basically tells the story of East Germany through artifacts, if you like. And so there's, I don't know, the different soap powders, the different chocolates, the different liquors, all that sort of thing. And the cars, of course. And it comes in a beautiful box set, but also the full version has an very interesting reproduction of a East German pensioners' travel scrapbook. So that gives a fantastic window into East Germany, and they're obviously £100. It's probably out of most people's reach, but they've done a cut down version of it, which I think is called something like the East German Handbook.
Yeah,
which retails at £30 or something like that. So that would be my absolute recommendation in non-fiction terms. In fiction terms, I particularly loved my guest tutor at City University. I chose this author who's probably not that well known, although he I think sold millions as a joint author of some thriller series, but it wouldn't have been under his name. But under his own name, Philip Singleton, he wrote a novel probably about 5 years ago now called The Valley of Unknowing. And it's set near Dresden, because I think that's where his wife was from Halle Neustadt. So, but anyway, he had some sort of link to Dresden, even though he's British. And the Valley of Unknowing refers to Dresden was low-lying land, and it was one of the few areas in East Germany that couldn't receive West German TV signals, and hence the Valley of Unknowing.
Right.
And it's a very good book. It's basically about this operator, this chancer, who passes someone. I think he was a novelist. Yes, he was a novelist who'd written some book, probably based on Halle Neustadt. It was something of Neustadt, and that has been a big seller, fictional thing, but a big seller in East Germany. But then he hit writer's block, and then he passes off somebody else's book as his own. So it's quite funny and excellent
right.
book.
Well,
so there's a couple of recommendations.
No, those are great recommendations, and I think one of our guests has mentioned DDR Handbook actually in a previous episode. So it's good to hear another recommendation for that. I might need to extend the mortgage, though. It sounds like
yes. No, but he might have been sent a free copy as well. You see, so he's trying to pay them back. But you could always, running Cold War podcasts, you could ask to review it.
I could. That's an angle. Thank
whether
you.
you'd get away
David.
with it.
Yeah. Well, hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Is there any film or TV series that you'd recommend that you think is a good factual or fictional representation of the GDR?
Oh, okay. Yes. So I'm very surprised why this series hasn't been taken up by the BBC for BBC Four, or indeed even more surprised why it's not on Walter Presents for all four.
Yeah.
Maybe it's some sort of rights reason, but the series is Weissensee, and it's had three. I think it's finished now, but there was 3 series, and unfortunately, only the second series on DVD has English subtitles. Don't ask me why. There are complicated ways of trying to generate English subtitles for the others, I think through Google Translate, so you get a load of rubbish. But basically, why it's interesting is I think it was the first attempt at a more sympathetic look at the Stasi, because it's the main family in it are, if you like, a Stasi family. So the father is some high up, colonel or possibly even higher, and then one of the sons is a nasty piece of work but up and coming in the Stasi, and then the other son is much more conflicted, and he works for the People's Police as a regular Volkspolizist. So that's very interesting. It's really, probably you would need some German, but you can understand it in any case, even if your German's not that good. And that is a fantastic series. And actually, on one of my research trips recently, I liked it so much, I sought out the house, which was the fictionalized their house near what was supposed to be Weissensee, which is an area of Berlin and was an area of East Berlin, but in fact it was based on a house they filmed it on a house that was actually in West Berlin,
right,
at the time. Okay,
well that
would be a recommendation. Then in terms of films, obviously there's The Lives of Others and Barbara, and Goodbye Lenin is great fun. So there's quite a few.
Yeah, and Barbara is that the one where the woman goes over or gets into the West, and it's
no, I think that's West. That's West.
Right.
That's West, which again was interesting, because I think she went into in effect a refugee centre, didn't she? And it wasn't all as straightforward as she thought, which was a bit of an echo of what happens in Stasi Child. No, Barbara is, what is she? It's a long time since I've watched it. I think she works possibly as a nurse or something. There's some sort of hospital link, but it's the same sort of feel as The Lives of Others, but just a different take.
Okay. Well, no, that's great. Well, I'll make sure we've got some links to those recommendations. Now, David, where's the best place for people to find you online?
Well, I've got a website, and it's named after Stasi Child, so it's www.stasichild.com. You can find me there. You can find me on Twitter. I'm DJY, which is my initials, David Young, David John Young, underline writer, DJY underline writer on Twitter. And on Facebook, what am I on Facebook? I might be Stasi Child, facebook.com/Stasi Child.
Okay,
or
well,
David Young, crime writer. I'm there anyhow on Facebook.
Well, I'll find those.
I don't do as much on Facebook, to be honest.
No.
I find it all a bit. I think I'm going to take the Weatherspoons approach and give up all social media. My publishers wouldn't be very
Well, don't
happy,
give up
actually.
Twitter. I enjoy following you on there, David. But I'll provide links to all of those on the show notes. David, it's been a real pleasure.
Oh, no, thank you very much, Ian. I enjoyed doing it. some of those stories I've told before, but I think some of them I haven't. So,
well, you're
good.
telling them to a new audience, Dave.
Yes.
So,
No,
it's
nice.
I think.
And it's nice doing it from a sort of radio point of view, if you like.
I hope you enjoyed our interview with David. If you'd like to understand more about the subjects, the books and the films we discussed, there's links in the show notes at coldwarconversations.com/episode and the number 7. Don't forget you can join our discussion group on Facebook. Just search for Cold War Conversations, and we're also on Twitter at Cold War Pod. If you like what you're hearing, please leave reviews on iTunes or with your podcast provider. Thank you very much for listening.
This is the Voice of America, Washington, D.C., signing off.